Movies, the pinnacle of humanity. They entertain, influence, and make ridiculous amounts of money. But how did we get here from this to this? But before we start, I'll make an announcement at the end of the video about a challenge that I will partake in starting this Saturday. So let's go! It's the 19th century. We're out here burning coal and everything, and this guy, Joseph Plateau, says, "Fuck it, I want to watch moving images." So he invented a phenakistoscope, turning wheel that had a finite amount of pictures which had the same motion every second or so. A bunch of others tried to improve and create new ways of watching pictures that move. And then, in 1888, Louis M. Augustin Laprince silently shot the first film of guys being dudes. But in 1895, two Frenchies called the Lumiere brothers said his joke louder and started showing what they made. So that's why most of the people think that they invented film, while in reality they were just the kid in a huge group project who went to present the slides to the class and somehow got all the praise. It was a crazy new medium, but at that time movies were just as interesting as watching some security camera footage until this wacky magician, Georges Melies, started making inventive sets, costumes, and compositing special effects that he used for his magic shows, blowing everyone away. Then, in 1906, the first feature film was released, making people sit in movie theaters for more than just the usual 20 minutes, with a lot of more opportunities to get kicked in the seat or for that one guy to laugh 10 times louder than everyone else. Of course, with all that came some unforeseen consequences, like a guy in 1915 literally making a 3-hour-long movie that showed the KKK in a positive way, making so many people outraged and reviving the Klan for another 100 years until it became a joke. But yeah, that's a topic for a different video. Because in the 1910s, black people, and even before that time women, got a chance to create movies that they wanted to make, with even the controversial ones getting greenlit. Well, at least for some time, till everything became super safe studio-made stuff. So for now, let's move to Europe, where in the 1920s, cinema evolved way more. We start to see some crazy shit like fast editing in Russian movies, which were just a bunch of propaganda, but it was still experimental and very ahead of the curve. Also Germans, going sicko mode, with a very stylistic lighting and crazy special effects. But sadly, neither of those things can top Warner Bros. Gamble to release the first big movie that introduced synced sound. Audiences here, there, and everywhere loved it. But other studios, in all of their wisdom, thought it was just a fad, because who would want some other sound than the music in their movies, right? Right? Yeah, nah. In 5 years, pretty much every movie released was a talkie. From then on, those studios started to gain more and more control of the art and the whole global movie industry. And with that came the star system and its top advert, the Oscars, show masked as a community bonding ceremony, which was actually very much against unions and just tried to make its stars even more famous so they could sell even more tickets to the same guy and gal story. But don't worry, this guy, Orson Welles, released Citizen Kane in 1941, a movie that is held the best ever made. Wrong. It's still great and it used a lot of experimental techniques at the time, even though pretty much none of them were invented by this Welles guy. You know, that really reminds me of something. Apple. But you can't deny that Apple, Orson Welles, and even Drake all found a way to take a lot of different stuff and combine them in a desirable package. So in the 1940s, we got a bunch of great movies that still had the studio feel but were very good in quality. But with the popularity of TVs going up and up in the 50s, big bad Hollywood guys got scared and they tried everything to make people go to the cinema by inventing stuff like smell-o-vision, reviving 3D, creating shaking chairs, and lastly, widescreen format, the only thing that wasn't a gimmick. But all those things won't ever top the first shown toilet flushing in the 1960s film Psycho. A movie literally about a guy who kills had a controversial toilet flushing shot. But heading back to Europe, in the end of the 50s and the start of 60s, we get a famous French New Wave, a film movement with no studio bullshit, just old school YouTubers going outside and vlogging with their handheld cameras and underpaid editors. It was just a complete fuck you to the norm, and the effects of this style will reach the mainstream US landscape only in a decade. But right now, we get a bunch of iconic movies like James Bond, The Sound of Music, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I would say this decade was for perfecting everything we learned in the 50s. And then the funky 70s rolled in, with basically every movie being shot outside the overlit studios with great amounts of film grain and shoulder-mounted cameras, which were soon replaced by the Steadicam, literally invented for this new style of filmmaking. The greatest example of 70s cinema being Taxi Driver, an anti-war movie about this messed up guy who was a sad icon of the new Hollywood and its realistic style. But let us not be fooled. In 1977, Star Wars hit the cinemas, and it was a real blockbuster, where people waited for lines longer than a block to see this film, and that's where we start to get more and more into fantasy action epics. Moving to the 80s, every movie we still watch today is either an action adventure that cost a bunch of money to make, or a horror flick that is usually about some dumb teens being slaughtered. The perfect embodiment of the 80s is the beef between Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, two big guys who had big guns. In a way, this is the dumb decade. But it's alright, because 90s gave us such a variety of popular movies, from action to comedy to sci-fi and to the huge resurgence of rom-coms. Weirdly, only a couple of movies that you would call a fantasy action adventure were released in the 90s, one of them being the biggest leap forward for computer-generated visual effects, and that's Jurassic Park. But other than that innovation and the first digital cinema cameras being used, most of us watched well-made, positive movies that didn't have anything that experimental. Until 2001 9/11, where the whole industry changed and most of the rest of it you already know. But in these recent decades, there only have been two turning points, which is the 2008 financial crisis, after which everyone just had to create a cinematic universe or upload their movies onto YouTube. And most recently, the big virus that stopped every production in this world, and now we'll see a lot more smaller films and distancing. So yeah, it's been a wild few centuries, but now I'd like to talk about a challenge that I made for myself. Every Saturday I'll be making a short film influenced by the decade of movies. So I'll start from the 1890s, and by the end of Christmas I'll end with the movies we have nowadays. But don't be frightened, it's only going to be some of the things and ideas from that time, not all of it. It'll still be my stories, the stories I want to tell, and in a way that I want to tell them, just with some of the constraints and stylistic choices that were made back then. So I hope you like it. I'll still be uploading some of the Wednesdays, just videos that will completely be my style and none of this historical stuff. So yeah, I hope you'll enjoy it and wish me luck. See ya.